Okay, welcome to In Defense of the Revolution, Cuba podcast from a Canadian perspective. My name is Robert Crooks. I'm joined today with Samantha Hislop. So today we're going to begin by talking about a beauty pageant taking place in Miami. Samantha, did you want to fill us in on this one?
Yeah, so the competition has already wrapped up actually for the Miss Cuba pageant, and the winner of this will go on to represent Cuba in the Miss Universe beauty pageant. And the winner is Lina Luaces. She's from Miami. Her mother is a woman named Lily Estefan. That name probably sounds familiar to some of the listeners. She is related to Gloria Estefan. That's the aunt. That's the aunt of the winner of this Miss Cuba pageant in South Florida.
Wow.
There's a bit of controversy on both sides. So on one hand, it's kind of funny because even within the South Florida community, there's a lot of outrage actually that Lina Luaces won, saying, the pageant was rigged because she just comes from a very influential and powerful counter-revolutionary Cuban family. Regardless of their political views, how they feel about Cuba or not, people are not happy about the results of this pageant because of her connections, and they're mad about nepotism and whatnot, rightly so. Lina Luaces, the winner, she was born and raised in Miami. She doesn't speak any Spanish. Like, I speak better Spanish than her. And she, of the contestants in this Miss Cuba pageant, she was representing one of the eastern provinces in Cuba. I can't remember if it was like Santiago, or I don't remember, but they each, like, there was a representative of each Cuban province, and then one was crowned the winner. So Lina won. Her mother, Lily Estefan, has a net worth of about $500 million.
Holy shit.
I think she's an executive or a producer. She's really high up for the Univision channel, which is a right-wing Latin American channel out of South Florida. So, very influential, a ton of pull in that community. So there's a lot of anger among the Cuban community in Florida about the crowned winner in the first place. A lot of people didn't feel that she should have won, but I don't really want to talk too much about that because we don't really, I frankly don't care. The more important question is who gets to represent Cuba, or why does she get to represent Cuba in this pageant? Mm-hmm. So there was an article in Cuba Debate about this competition, about the crowning of Miss Cuba to represent Cuba in Miss Universe 2025. The competition is going to be held in Thailand. And the article highlights some of the legitimate issues with this. So I'm going to go through some of the points and we can just talk about them. So the first thing is, again, like we said, Lina wasn't born in Cuba, yet she's representing the province of Santiago de Cuba in Miss Universe Cuba. So she's never set foot in the eastern region or even in Cuba at all, and she doesn't speak fluent Spanish, but it goes much deeper than that. So I think what's really important here is highlighting the disconnection between these beauty pageants and the national identities and realities that they're supposed to be, like, representing or embodying, right? So
were the other contestants from Cuba?
I haven't looked into the other contestants. I'm gonna guess that some of them may have been born in Cuba, or may have visited Cuba, but probably some of the other contestants are just like her too, where they really have no connection to Cuba whatsoever and they don't speak the language. We see this, I think, we've seen this for other countries as well. I don't know if this has happened with Venezuela before too. It's usually countries that are considered adversaries of the United States, where someone from the diaspora in the United States ends up representing that country. Their politics are usually not anti-imperialist.
They're usually far
very
right.
pro-US.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're far right. Yeah, sometimes they might be liberal, but liberal is still it's still right leaning, of course. So,
well, I was just gonna say, because it reminds me of like Chrystia Freeland saying that the real Ukrainians are in Alberta, right? Because like she comes from this diaspora that was kicked out of Ukraine because they were Nazis after the Second World War, right? And then she played such a huge part in stoking the far right.
Yeah.
Militias and politics in Ukraine. And it's sort of like, even though I guess Ukraine today is obviously a proxy of the United States, but it's like there's like still these connections, right, where people get kicked out by left-wing or revolutionary governments, and like it's usually these far-right political types that go to places like the United States or Canada, and then they start acting like they're the real representatives in exile or whatever.
Yeah, and it's like there was a whole wave of Ukrainian immigrants long before that were actually socialists, very left-leaning, but they are not. We don't really talk about them in Canada in the mainstream, and we've got the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, which is far right. Like that's what Chrystia Freeland represents.
They were bringing the Nazis. They were like instrumental in bringing the Nazis from Ukraine into Canada after World War II.
Precisely. Yeah. So these are the people that supposedly represent a whole nation. So that's the same thing you get with in some cases with these beauty pageants, because the nature. I can't remember how Miss Universe even started, but I feel like it was an American. Isn't there some connection with Donald Trump or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think he owned
it's an American.
I think he owned it.
Yeah,
at one point, like
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like it in itself, the politics of it, or it's like an American kind of thing, and so some of these countries are represented by someone in that nation's diaspora that lived or lives or grew up in the United States, or doesn't even have any connection to that country at all. And like you said, their politics are usually very right-wing or counter-revolutionary or pro-imperialist or pro-intervention, and they're on board with U.S. foreign policy against the country that they supposedly are representing. So that's usually how it goes, and that's what's happening with Miss Cuba. So Cuba actually stopped participating in this pageant, in beauty pageants in general, I should say, around 1960 after the revolution. And it was a conscious decision.
Yeah.
There's a reason for it. And it's that, pageants, you're objectifying women by reducing them to their physical appearance and the cuteness of their responses to sometimes they pose them as like profound questions, or but they give really shallow, silly, or cute answers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's also like, they look for this attitude of like submissiveness too, right? Like just to like which contestant is going to best represent like the male fantasy or whatever.
Yeah, and the standards are very Eurocentric and classist. The women that compete, they look more and more the same too. Like as time has gone on, I find like very similar plastic surgery and aesthetic procedures and cosmetic procedures. I think they all have, a certain length of hair, a certain body type, a certain height. They all look the same. So there's very little diversity. And so they're reducing women to objects. And I also mentioned class. Poor women don't have the time or the money to be able to compete in these things. This is for women with means, with wealth. Most of them are like now social media influencers or fitness models. You know, they love to talk about NGOs and stuff, the organizations that they work with or for, volunteer with. And those NGOs are usually horrible, doing horrible things in other countries. Or they're just not solving any domestic depending what they are. They just function as, you know, it's just like a feel-good thing, but they're actually causing harm kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the type of candidates that are in these pageants. And so Cuba, after the revolution, they've built like an alternative paradigm where a woman's worth is measured by their contributions, their concrete contributions, whether it be in their society, whether it be in medicine or science or education, athletics, not by their physical appearance, and not even those other achievements either. You're worth. You are valuable. You're valuable no matter what. Everybody has different abilities. Not everybody is going to be, you know, really successful academically, even in those fields, or not everybody's an athlete. So that's not what gives value to a woman or what makes a woman valuable. So
say, like, you could see the you know, the effects of that, like in the National Assembly in Cuba, right, where it's like over 50% women. Whereas in the U.S., I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I don't think it's near half of governors are women, right?
Right, exactly. So like this industry, this beauty pageant industry really just, it privileges those that have the resources and the means to compete in the pageants. And it's commercializing national identities. And it really is disconnected from the everyday reality of the people and the women that live in these countries. So it's commodifying the Cuban identity and stripping it of its context. So Cuba has rejected this superficiality, and they're more focused on what kind of society they want to build and what values that they're willing to defend. And the Cuban people don't need to validate themselves on a beauty pageant stage. Their idea is that Cuban beauty isn't measured on a runway, but in a classroom, on a sports field, just in everyday life. I don't even know who really pays much attention to these pageants anymore. I think there's a declining interest in them, I think. Maybe I could be wrong. I feel like when cable TV was more of a thing back in the day, like when I was a kid, like these kind of things would be bigger and more people would tune in just because. But the way that we like watch or consume TV now is different. So I just thought this is worth talking about from a cultural perspective and hegemonic perspective, because it's annoying. It's offensive. It's annoying that these contestants are representing countries that they have no connection to, and but they're claiming to speak for or represent. So I just thought the response from the Cuban media was really excellent. And then whereas in Miami, the contestant herself, Lina Luaces, is getting very defensive. Her and her mother are very defensive of her win in the pageant. They don't really have anything to back it up because, I mean, it does just look like it's just pure nepotism. Yeah. And then it's just funny that people in South Florida, the Cuban community there, like I said, I don't know that all of them are against the revolution. Well, of course it's not homogenous, but the ones that are speaking out or that are outraged about this, it doesn't even matter that whether they're pro-revolution or counter-revolutionary, they're really outraged and mad that the women who are winning these pageants always have these significant connections and like serious wealth behind them too. Yeah. So these pageants they're really just a joke. I think they're less relevant and becoming less and less relevant, and I hope they are, because I think they're terrible, they're crappy, they're shit. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that is interesting, right? Because as the revolution ages, like we're getting to this point, right, where you have a lot of people of like Cuban descent in Miami who, like this person, has apparently never been to Cuba and really knows nothing about Cuba, and only knows what they've been told by their like circle of anti-revolutionary Cuban families. So like the longer the revolution lasts, you're gonna get these people who are further and further removed from the actual Cuba who are claiming to speak for it. So it's a really interesting like phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's sad that like when I was growing up, I had I didn't have it, but in my house we had a Miami Sound Machine record, and learning about Gloria Estefan was disappointing.
Yeah, I know. I just want to read just before we like move on. This was from Yahoo Entertainment, and it mentions like a couple like what she was asked, some of the questions she was asked, and her responses, and this just was a perfect illustration of the nature of these things, these pageants. So it says, of Lina Loasa's in the competition, when asked what Cuban dessert she would be, she playfully responded, "A pastelito de guayaba, tough on the outside, soft and sweet inside." And then it goes on to say, she also impressed viewers and judges with her deeper reflections. When prompted about her potential role as a leader and cultural representative, Loasa's delivered a powerful statement. "Being Cuban is my blood, my strength, my voice, my greatest pride." I don't, that's just a statement. It's not, there's no reflection there on her role as, that's not impressive at all. And that's not a deep reflection at all. And, she's not, she's got nothing to do with Cuba. She has Cuban, ancestors, but that's about it.
Well, I wondered, like, have these, like, pageants become any more, like, progressive or, like, and, like, because, whatever, women can do whatever they want if they want to compete in that type of thing. I don't want to judge anybody for their decisions necessarily, but like they really ask the contestants what kind of dessert you would be. Like, fuck off.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's like,
yeah, at least try to do better.
Yeah, this is like the 1950s. Like, holy shit.
Exactly. I know, right? I was shocked when I read that. I was like, at least pretend to be more profound, more serious. Like, and so, yeah, the rest of that, at the end of the article, it says, despite being born in the U.S. and speaking Spanish with a noticeable American accent, Loasa's addressed skeptics directly. "I feel Cuban, not American," she said, rejecting calls that she should have competed in Miss USA or Miss America instead. Her remarks received thunderous applause from the audience, including her famous relatives. Of course. So, yeah, that's what these things are really about, I guess. And again, yeah, we're not judging, but
a little bit, maybe.
We are a little, yeah. I guess we are. I'm not. I don't really support these pageants, but
yeah,
especially these questions. It's a joke, but
yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so she's going to go represent Cuba at the Miss Universe pageant this November in Thailand.
All right, well, good luck with that. Okay, so, the next thing I think we wanted to talk about is there was an opinion piece that was making the rounds, and usually, this opinion piece was written by someone who's the senior policy advisor for defense budgeting at the Heritage Foundation, which is like a far-right neocon think tank. So it's like usually like...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so usually we wouldn't even like really give much attention to this because, yeah, obviously right-wingers, are going to right-wing. But like, I think that this one was making the rounds. I saw it published on different sites, and then I started to see it on social media a little bit. So I felt like it was worth it to talk about it because some of the information that it leaves out is just so crazy to me. So the article is called "Cuba is Selling Soldiers to Russia," and I accessed it through the Washington Times, but like I said, it was published in a few different outlets. And so the first sentence is, as President Trump works to end the war in Ukraine, At least one of our closest neighbors has been working to keep it going. Cuba. So, like, this is insane. This idea that, like, Trump is, like, really close to bringing peace to Ukraine and Russia, and, you know, this is something that the U.S. never wanted, and they just want peace, and they want what's best for everybody. But this little country, Cuba, who's, like, never had more than, like, 11 million people, you know, which is, like, there's more people in New York City than there are in Cuba, but it's somehow really keeping this war going in Ukraine, which is, you know, just an absurd thing to say. Now, whether or not there are soldiers, Cuban soldiers in Russia, I think is, you know, certainly Cuba has denied that they've sent soldiers, and I think they even arrested 17 people that they charged with human trafficking for... for basically promising Cubans money to go either like work or fight in for Russia in Ukraine, and you know, it's hard to tell like what the truth is, but I think there is some legitimacy to this. But it's like you're basically, whoever these like traffickers are, they're taking advantage of a country that's been blockaded so brutally. You know, the purpose of the blockade, like we've said, is to make people so poor that they'll overthrow the government. And so you have these people who are really suffering, and then you come in and you're starting offering them money to go to Russia, and maybe you're telling them, you know, that they're going to go, you know, work a job, and then they end up on the front lines or whatever the case may be. But something shady is going on for sure. But this idea that like the Cuban government is like, you know, like this company that will just lease out its soldiers is complete bullshit. And, you know, the next thing this article talks about is like that Cuba's only purpose in life is to counter U.S. interests, you know, like, and this is such a perfect like way of framing like this U.S. centric worldview where everybody in the world is so focused on what you're doing that they're either with you or against you, where Cuba doesn't have its own interests. All they want to do is to take down U.S. interests. And so the examples that this article gives are, quote, the tens of thousands of Cuban troops, military advisors, and doctors, supported communist guerrillas and would-be despots in countries such as Ethiopia, Yemen, Angola, and Grenada. And like these examples are insane because, like, yes, first of all, Cuban soldiers did fight in Ethiopia in the Ogaden War. This is when, you know, after... or no, it wasn't Portuguese, Italian. After they were able to throw off Italian colonialism, Haile Selassie came to power. Haile Selassie, though, was basically like, you know, he was in the pocket of the USA and Europe. And so he was overthrown by a popular socialist movement. And when this happened, its neighboring country, Somalia, took the opportunity to invade and seize territory in Ethiopia. So Cuba sent soldiers there to like fight back Somalia so that Ethiopia could like maintain its territory and like just get stability and build its government. But you know, the US was like backing Haile Selassie, so they were like really invested in trying to defeat the Marxist government in Ethiopia. So like these were U.S. interests. This was somehow an example of Cuba just wanting to fight back U.S. interests. Like this is like perfect example of Cuba's like revolutionary internationalism. Like they're trying to support the self-determination of Ethiopia.
I was gonna say at the very beginning when they're making the claim that Cuba's trying to keep this war going, that's really interesting. It kind of shows you this is a very far right kind of stance, because if you could say right now that it's the liberals, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or Canada, who actually want to keep this war going.
Yeah.
And it's not that I think the Republicans under Trump, they just realize they're expending too many resources, and they're looking at China and other areas, and they realize that the U.S. has lost to Russia. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they don't want to keep the war going, but they don't want to keep it going at their expense. So they're not trying to make this wonderful peace deal or like save Ukraine or help Ukrainians. They're to blame for this 100%. But I just think that's absolutely ridiculous saying that Cuba wants to keep this war going. It's liberals and conservatives in all these Western European and Canada and the United States, Western European countries, that have wanted to keep this going for years.
And Cuba,
I just think that's stupid.
And on the international stage, Cuba's been calling for peace the whole time. Mm-hmm. And while, in the U.S. and even in Canada, calling for peace would get you branded as a Putin puppet, So, like, this is pretty ridiculous, this idea that Cuba is somehow perpetuating this war.
But they don't say anything about Colombia, when actually the highest proportion of mercenaries fighting against, I think they're fighting on the Ukrainian side, actually, against Russia. So that's probably one reason they don't say anything. But Colombians, there's so many Colombian mercenaries that are fighting in that war on the Ukrainian side. And that's never talked about. And
those are the good mercenaries.
Yeah, right. So we don't have to worry about that. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure that on the part of both Cuba, the Cuban government, and the Russian government, this recruiting and trafficking, it's not any official practice. It's not they condemn it. Yeah. It's people it's Cubans who have been prosecuted, and Russians too, who I'm pretty sure have been prosecuted as well, who have been running this like trafficking kind of ring. Mm-hmm. And it's not just Cubans. There's other people coming too, but it's people that are profiting off of war. It's not the official Cuban governments of either countries that are doing this. No, Russia does not need Cubans to fight with them.
Well, and it's also taking advantage of the economic situation in Cuba, which is entirely caused by the blockade.
Mm-hmm. The blockade.
Yeah. So these other I just want to get back to these 4 countries that he names and Cuba's actual involvement in them. So we talked about Ethiopia. The next one was Yemen. So there was never Cuban troops in Yemen. Yemen was split into 2, basically like a colonial partition. South Yemen gained independence from Britain in 1967 and formed like a socialist state, and Cuba sent doctors and teachers. So never any troops. How dare they send doctors and teachers? But of course, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia backed North Yemen, so this was seen as how could you? And this is, and to these people, these neocons, this is just, Cuba isn't acting in their own interest or on their own principles. They're just, at this point, they're just doing what the Soviet Union's telling them to do. And all the Soviet Union wants to do is kill every American or whatever the case may be. Then he talks about, the 2 most egregious ones, though, in my mind, are Grenada and Angola. So in Grenada, the New Jewel movement, led by Maurice Bishop, came to power on with the October 19th Revolution in 1979. It was extremely popular movement. They were Marxist-Leninists, but even across classes, they were very popular. And even some of the white settlers even supported that movement, because the government that was in power was brutally authoritarian. The whole country was just a neo-colony of the U.S. So when the New Jewel movement split and Maurice Bishop was executed, which is just one of the great tragedies of the 20th century.
Yeah.
I can't even it's so sad to think about this. Mm-hmm. But then the US invaded Grenada right after this happened. And Cuba had been there. They had been requested to come by the Grenada government, and they were building hospitals. They built an airport, which the U.S. of course uses propaganda to say, well, this is where the Soviet Union's going to have planes and they're going to invade America from there.
That's their landing pad.
Yeah, but like they were building hospitals, they built an airport, they were building schools, they were just like helping in like building infrastructure, and they sent like doctors and teachers, and they sent experts in agriculture to help them like grow their so they could grow their own food. I remember watching this amazing documentary of Grenada, revolutionary Grenada, and they were like, they had these like, they showed how these workers would be like just working like half the day they would work, and then half the day they would go to school, but their school would be like teaching them what happens to their product like after they produce it, so they could like understand the economy and how what they were doing was actually helping the state become like more like prosperous, and like it's just like a very interesting like look into Grenada at that time. I saw it on, I can't remember what it's called, but I saw it on YouTube, and it was, if you can find it, I really recommend it. So that was Cuba's involvement in Grenada. Because they were already there, they also took up arms to try to fight off the U.S. invasion. But of course, they're a very small group, and the country was in chaos after Maurice Bishop was executed. So the U.S. basically just did what they wanted. Now, Angola might be the most ridiculous one to bring up.
God.
Because like this idea that Cuba was in Angola to fight back U.S. interests. So we're just clearly saying that U.S. interests are apartheid in Africa, right? So Cubans had Operation Carlotta, 1975, I think November 5th. I just know that because the 50th anniversary is coming up later this year. And so, because the Cubans know, as Fidel said many times, like Cuba and Africa are forever linked. There was obviously a lot of slave trade between Africa and Cuba, in the 18th or like in the 1800s and 1700s and 1600s. So there are like these links between Africa and Cuba that the revolutionary government and movement has always like made a point of prioritizing that connection, right? And so when Angola gained independence from Portugal, a communist government came to power. South Africa then invaded Angola and worked with U.S.-backed, I guess, like rebels or whatever, to overthrow that government. And Cuba was fighting alongside other African guerrillas to defeat South Africa in 1988, where the definitive battle was Cuito Cuanavale, and this basically ended apartheid in that region of Africa and South Africa. And like this is why like Nelson Mandela and Fidel were so close, and why they had such mutual respect for each other. There's like a statue of Fidel in South Africa, there's I remember there's video of Fidel going to South Africa after apartheid, and like the people just like love him, for Cuba's participation in this like liberation movement. And this guy here is talking about how evil Cuba was and how they were just acting on the Soviet Union's orders to go into these countries. Like, it's just, if you don't know this history, you just get such a twisted view of the world and history. So even though this is just from some far-right kook, I felt like we should talk about it because it was just so infuriating to read this.
Yeah, and when they mentioned those countries and Cuba's role, what it's really saying is that solidarity, internationalism, those things are against U.S. interests.
Exactly.
Unity, solidarity, internationalism are a threat to U.S. hegemony, and that's what they don't want. That's what they're afraid of. That's what they're really saying. And if you don't know if you don't know history, like you said, you wouldn't understand when they say U.S. interests. You might not really understand fully what the U.S. interests are.
Yeah, because clearly, especially by bringing up Angola, they are saying U.S. interests are apartheid, which of course we all know that. But we know that. Yeah, this is quite an admission, but you don't get that admission if you don't know the history. Also, like the fact that like this idea that Cuba's, intentionally sending soldiers to fight in Ukraine, and because their only interests are destroying the U.S. blah blah blah. It's like they also don't mention like all the like especially children that Cuba took in from the Chernobyl disaster. Like there's so many examples of selfless internationalism that Cuba has performed, and it's just like to just reduce it to the Cuba is sending soldiers for this sort of base. This base interest of money only, and to like be against U.S. interests, like go fuck yourself.
Yeah, and again about they don't talk about, like you said, mercenaries, especially from the global south. A lot of the time, the reason that they're agreeing to go and fight in these wars is economic reasons. And that their own countries, they're more easily enticed and more easily trafficked because of the prospects to make more money and support their families. Some of them might be going on false pretenses, like you said. Maybe they don't realize they're going to be on the front lines and they've been offered a job. I think in some cases that's what happened with some Cubans that went to Russia when they were trafficked. They actually didn't even realize that. What they thought they had jobs in, like, say, construction or you know, something like that. They didn't know what they were really in for. But a lot of these mercenaries from these other countries are doing it for economic reasons, the same reasons that a lot of people emigrate from their homeland. It's not because they don't love their country or their people or their own culture. Nobody wants to leave where they're from, but they feel that it's just necessary to be able to survive and support their families. And so I'm sure absolutely nothing was said there about the sanctions on Cuba and why maybe some Cubans that are over there fighting right now, why they might have been enticed to go and work there or fight there or whatever, because they're trying to support their families.
Yeah, and so, if you compare this to the other things we talked about, like Angola and Ethiopia and Grenada, like these places, like when people signed up, like it was completely volunteer, like a voluntary sign up for those.
Those ones, yeah.
So it's
those were official. Like Cuba was there to help. I'm not where I guess I didn't want to don't want to confuse things there.
No, I don't.
When we're talking about,
I don't think you are, but I think just this framing that Cuba would somehow be involved in tricking its own people to go to war is just such bullshit. Right. And it's also it's also a weird admission that the Ukraine fighting Russia is in the U.S. interest, because that's obvious, but the U.S. doesn't talk like that. When they talk about Zelensky or Ukraine, they talk about this like heroic, like anti-imperialist self-determination
like
fight.
Ukraine's defending their sovereignty as if they are still sovereign. But in this article, they're saying, Ukraine fighting against Russia is U.S. interests. So you're admitting that you are trying to wear down Russia. You're trying to take down Russia. It's an admission.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I still, it just blows me away that they mentioned like Grenada as well. Like, are you kidding me? That's another, that was so blatant what the United States did there. Like there's if you, most people don't know anything about it. They don't know about it, but if you look into it, it's really clear what happened there. There's no, there really shouldn't be any debate there. And that,
Maurice Bishop too. It's interesting because I think he was speaking in New York City once, like while he was the leader of Grenada, and he said that the U.S. can't allow them to continue because they are like the first English-speaking socialist country, And because it would be so much easier to speak to the American people as a native English speaker, that the U.S. could not allow them to continue.
I never thought about that. And a lot of the there's a significant portion of the Caribbean region. There's other countries that are Anglo speaking there too, English countries too.
Yeah. Which the U.S. has involvement.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Yeah, I never thought about that language angle and socialist countries. That's so true. There's never been an English speaking socialist country. Wow.
Yeah, and you have to.
That's a good point.
And you have to rely on other sources, right, to actually hear what they're saying.
Yeah, and then it's easier to twist things or not report on them at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm.
So, should we move on?
Yeah. Just a quick one. Just as we're following like more domestic things happening in Cuba. Reuters was reporting on the recent increase to pensions for retirees in Cuba. So the Cuban government recently doubled the monthly pension amount for retirees. It's been something ongoing in the Western media. There's so much criticism about how Cubans that work in a state job or are retired, that their salaries or their pensions are not high enough. So there's constant criticism of that. There's constant talk about inflation, and they always blame the Cuban government for mismanaging the economy internally. They downplay or leave out U.S. sanctions on Cuba and the devastating effect that that's had, especially in the past 5 years. Reuters did report on the Cuban government increasing the pensions, but that's like the first opening paragraph. The rest of the article just kind of goes on to they do quote President Miguel Diaz-Canel, who told the National Assembly that, you know, the government knows that it has to start improving the situation of retirees, and many of these people, they have given their lives to the revolution, and it's not there's no intent by the Cuban government, by the state, to deprive people, whether working age and receiving a salary or retired. They want to pay people more, but they don't have the money to do that. There is an economic crisis. And that's another thing too, just as a little sidebar kind of from that. That's one angle that the United States has been exploiting, is really trying to pit the private sector against the non-private sector in Cuba and really hinder the Cuban government from being able to accomplish the things that it intends to accomplish, because it doesn't have the resources to pay for things, to be able to pay higher salaries, or to be able to pay for more infrastructure or upgrading existing infrastructure and so on. I think the last administration, probably under Biden, was like a little bit more, slightly more like pro-Cuban, like private business, because they wanted to create like more disparity of income among Cubans, and have this certain like petty bourgeois kind of class of people who were getting increasingly wealthier versus people who, you know, may and a lot and maybe don't even have to work too hard to generate that wealth, versus people who have been studying hard and working hard, and their state salary isn't competing with this person who's running a business, and in some cases maybe employing exploitive practices in their business with their pricing or whatever else. Then there's the black market as well. But I feel like that was an important tactic in recent years of the U.S. government, was to kind of create that divide among Cuban society and discredit the Cuban government and so hopefully turn the average Cuban against socialism or against the government, and make them think, okay, maybe, you know, like a free market, a liberal, like neoliberalism, maybe it would be better here, you know. So in this article from Reuters, after they do quote the president of saying, you know, acknowledging that they know that they need to, and they have every intention to improve these pensions and the salaries of Cubans who work in the state sector, It just kind of goes on to talk about the decreased purchasing power for Cubans who have to pay for things in pesos, and that this increase in the pension is still not enough. And it's not due to inflation. It's not, the situation is still very difficult. It is. So it's not untrue, but it's just like a really dishonest way of reporting on it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really, at the end, it just says that the country's government mainly blames U.S. sanctions, which target foreign exchange earnings. And then that critics blame it on the Cuban government's sluggish economic reform. And by economic reform, critics really just want Cuba to just open up for foreign ownership and control and investment. So kind of like your typical Reuters article, but I just wanted to say, like, there's no argument to be made that the Cuban state doesn't want to pay its citizens, its workers, or its retirees higher salaries and pensions.
Mm-hmm.
It's the situation that they're in that's caused by the U.S. blockade, and we always have to keep emphasizing that because it's downplayed in our media here.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
I find it so interesting that, the mainstream media loves to just talk about how much people in Cuba are suffering and the Cuban government's not doing anything for them because they're hoarding all the money and they actually are all these corrupt people, blah, blah, blah. But then it's like when the Cuban government actually takes concrete steps to improve the lives of people, it's just like, oh, that's not enough. This is just petty, or this is just this is just something to, like, it's just propaganda or whatever the case may be. It's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But everything stems from the blockade. So yes, you can talk about the mistakes that the government has made. You can talk about the divisions in the society and like the tensions that are coming from those divisions, but they all stem from the blockade.
Yeah, exactly.
And and what you were saying earlier too about like the private sector, that I think the Biden and the Biden administration, the Democrats are more interested in building up this private sector, this petty bourgeois class. And yeah, that's to create more divisions, like even though Cuba's like they're open to this idea, but they have to keep a very like close eye on it and have a lot of regulations because they don't want to create this class divide, because right now the Cuban people are like a united people because there aren't these huge class divisions. I mean, there are obviously some divisions, and again, the blockade makes these divisions worse because it's based on like are you able to work in like the tourist industry where you get easier access to US dollars? Do you have family like in the US or in Spain who can send you money? So there are disparities like that, but those are specifically caused by the blockade, right? And then so if like the US can build up a class that like you said can make more money and can have like a more luxurious lifestyle compared to the working people, then these divisions will open up in society, and all of a sudden you will get a class of Cubans who are a minority, but they have more power because they have more money, and they start having interest in like more opening up, more liberalization of the economy, more US penetration into the economy, and then it would just spiral from there and it be very, very dangerous to the revolution.
Yeah, it just made me think of like, this is an anecdote, but I think it was maybe a week ago I was talking to a Cuban in Toronto, and we were talking about this kind of thing about the different systems and the economy, and what would happen if Cuba wasn't socialist, or do you think what system do you think would be better for Cubans? The US economic system, the capitalist system, the neoliberal system? And their response was, Cuba is a socialist country. He said Cuba must be a socialist country, and he said it doesn't mean we can't find ways to improve. We're always trying to improve, and we have to find ways to better deal with the U.S. blockade and move forward. But he said, if Cuba was no longer socialist and became a capitalist country, we would never have what, say, American citizens had in like the golden years of U.S. capitalism. Exactly. We would never ever achieve that. We would never achieve that comfort or those luxuries or that lifestyle ever. He's like, most of the world has never. Capitalist countries, most of them have never achieved that because of imperialism and neocolonialism. So there's obviously different opinions. This was an anecdote, but it made me feel, I really appreciated that response. Just just knowing that and acknowledging that socialism is the best way forward for a country like Cuba, or for any, for humanity, but for like any country that's trying to be sovereign and fight against imperialism and uplift its people. It must be socialism. And I just really love that response. Yeah. And
there's a concrete example of what Cuba would be, and that was Cuba before the revolution, where there was, like most people who lived in rural areas had no education and never saw a doctor and were dying of curable diseases, and it was a playground for the U.S. elite, so people could come to Cuba on vacation and like completely degrading the Cuban people and the Cuban territory and the Cuban land. Like it was basically run by like the mafia too, right? And there was all these like casinos and whatever the case may be. So like we know exactly what would happen if Cuba went back to that sort of economic system.
Also, I feel like I even notice among Cubans, even if their politics even if they're anti-communist, because of growing up in Cuba, if they grew up in Cuba, because of their culture, they just naturally have learned to be so much more caring and showing solidarity to their neighbors and their friends and their family, just the way that they treat each other, even if their politics aren't good. They have this internalized, their culture, the way that they have been raised, they have a connection with each other and a relationship with their fellow Cubans and other people from other countries too. It's the way that they treat each other is just so much more humane than what I have grown up with here in Canada. And I find that I see that too, even from, people from former Soviet countries, especially the elderly. Like they're just so much more caring and looking out for one another. It's just it's the way that they are. So if Cuba was no longer, it would like change the way that this Cuban person said it when they were like, Cuba is a socialist country, like we must be a socialist country. He kind of was saying it like it's who we are, and we wouldn't be Cuban anymore in the same way. Like we wouldn't be us if we weren't socialist. Like if you know what I'm saying, like we would be different. We would become different. Yeah. We would lose so much. Yeah.
Very briefly, want to speak about the new code of childhood, adolescence, and youth that I think has been finalized and ratified in the National Assembly. So this is something that came out of the Families Code, but it's basically an expansion of that to focus specifically on youth. There's 471 articles in the new code. Most of the articles address safety at school, at home, online, in the community, and also self-determination. For youth. There was a really great concept that came out of the Families Code called progressive autonomy, which was basically that there's no, like in capitalist countries or in Canada and the United States, it's like you're an adult when you're 21 or you're an adult when you're 18. And that's when you can sort of start making your own decisions or whatever the case may be. But like in Cuba, they have this concept of progressive autonomy that like, as soon as you're able to like formulate your own interests, then you have a say in how you're raised, how you're educated, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think this is the like the exact model for like a more progressive future for youth and for people in general, because it goes into like making sure that the youth have access to the training and education that they want, that they have access to decent employment, that they have access to the proper sexual and reproductive health care, that they're have equality in participation in culture. Like, you know, in our first thing we were talking about, you know, how it's like people like Gloria Estefan and like her niece, these very rich people who are only able to like, only rich people are able to like create culture and really participate in culture in that heights. But here in Cuba, they really try to like democratize it, make it more equal. And this code also guarantees the right to free self-expression and the development of one's identity. So, they're really going against sort of homophobia and transphobia specifically. It expands on the definition beyond of like self-identity beyond the binary of male and female. It's unlike the United States and Canada. If you're born intersex in Cuba, there is no surgery done on you until you can decide if you want the surgery and what kind of surgery you want, which is super important because so many children in like the quote-unquote Western world are born intersex, and they have the surgery to shape them into one stereotypical gender or another when they're still like a baby and they have no say in it, and then that can cause a lot of problems later on in life, like psychological problems and physical problems too. So this is a very progressive code. It was completely democratic in its creation. There was 825,000 people who participated in the process of creating the new code. In December 2024, the draft of the code was published online, and people could make comments on it, and then the team that was drafting the code could look at these comments and decide whether or not to implement them or whatever the case may be. People who were drafting the code also went to schools and other locations where children were, so that they could teach them about the code, but also get their feedback. So they were asking questions like, what should a code that addresses the rights of children and adolescents include? What would you recommend to the team drafting this legal document? So, they were actually getting feedback from the people who this code was going to was being made for, and who was the people it was going to protect. UNICEF reported on this, and they talked about how the team that was drafting the code, when they were going to get feedback from children, it was quote, a festive day, but also one of learning. They drew pictures about their rights and responsibilities, shared personal stories, and clarified doubts about how the new code proposes to protect their rights, end quote. So very like interactive, very participatory process in creating this. More than 124,000 pieces of feedback were collected from the public.
Wow.
that went into the code. There were 16 revisions after the first draft, and the one that became law was completed on July 22nd of this year. Now they're talking about enforcing the code. So, part of Cuba's enforcing this code is just like a huge education campaign to teach teachers, to teach parents, to teach youth, to teach everybody basically about what's in the code, why it's in the code, why it's good for everybody, and why it should be followed. So, I think this is incredible, especially when you compare it to the U.S.-backed genocide against children that's happening in Gaza right now. When you talk about how many youth and children in in the U.S. don't have access to healthcare, and in Canada, where we talk about how great our universal healthcare is, but there's still communities that just can't access healthcare because it's not, they don't have any hospitals or doctors in their communities or whatever the case may be. So like, while and there's still like this legacy, I think, in Canada and the United States of talking about children as possessions, as like property. Yeah, and it's like you can't, once you live under my roof, you'll live by my rules or whatever, that kind of attitude. And it's like, this is about giving self-determination to children. And
yeah,
I think there's that really great quote by Mariela Castro. I can't remember it exactly, but it's like, it's not the children that need to listen to us, it's us that need to listen to the children, because the children know. And so I just, this is just another example of how another world is possible. And it's also, this is what the blockade is crushing, and this is what the blockade is trying to crush. So,
yeah.
El día primero aquel, lleno de emoción y ruido, alguien dijo conmovido y feliz, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después de un año repite,